Shalom Aleichem. We continue in Hilchot, Talmud Torah, in Mishneh Torah, Rabbeinu Agadol, Rambam, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Perek Halacha Zayin. I will share the screen with you. Rambam states as follows: V'hayav la'amod mipnei rabo, mi sheyir'enu merachok melo ino. If the Talmud was sitting and his Rav was approaching, moving towards his direction, the Talmud must stand. Hayav la'amod mipnei rabo, mi sheyir'enu merachok melo ino. From whatever distance it may be, as soon as he is aware of him and can see him coming towards him, he must stand. And he remains standing until he disappears from view, from sight. In other words, let's say he's moving off in the distance or down a hill, so until the height of his Rav is as he is walking away and until he disappears from view. And only then is he allowed to sit. This, of course, is an indication, a clear indication of the mitzvah of kibud harav. As Rambam said at the beginning of this perek, Kashem she'adam mitzvah bichvod aviu uviratho. Just as a person is required to show honor and respect and also yirah. Yirah is here awe with regards to his father. Kachu hayav bichvod rabo yirato. And Rambam continued. This is all, of course, directly from Chazal. Rabo yater mi'aviu, and his father even more than his Rav, even more than his father. The respect and awe with regards to his Rav should be even greater than that of his father. She'aviu hevi'o lehayeh ha'olam hazeh, v'ribo shelimedo chokhmah hevi'o lehayeh ha'olam haba. His father brought him into this world. Hevi'o lehayeh ha'olam hazeh, v'ribo shelimedo chokhmah hevi'o lehayeh ha'olam haba. As we are reading this, I recall something in the Sifrei, which I would like to share with you, so that we'll all see the text. I'll have to call it up on the Bar-Hayim program. Just one moment. You should be able to see now on the screen quote from Sifrei on Devarim, Parashat V'et Hanan, Piska Lamed Beth. It says as follows: Uchvar haya Rabbi Eliezer, we're referring to Rabbi Eliezer ben Holkanos HaGadol, Choleh. He was ill and apparently nearing his end in this world. Uchvar haya Rabbi Eliezer Choleh, v'nichnesu Rabbi Tarfon, v'Rabbi Yoshua, v'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, v'Rabbi Akiva levakero. Some of his Talmidim came to visit him, to be with him. Amar lo Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi, Haviv atali Yisrael migalgal hama. You are more precious to Am Yisrael than the sun. Shigalgal hama me'ir ba'olam hazeh, wa ata hayata ba'olam hazeh, ba'olam haba. The sun only gives light in this world, but you have given us light in this world and in the world to come. Ba'olam haba. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi, Haviv atali Yisrael mimatan geshamim. You are a greater blessing to Israel than rainfall. Shegeshamim notanim hayim ba'olam hazeh, v'ata notata ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. Rain is life-giving in this world, but you have given us life in this world and in the next world. אמר לו רבי אלעזר בן עזריה, רבי חביב אתה לישראל מאב ואם, שאב ואם מביאים לעולם הזה, ואתה הבאת בעולם הזה ולעולם הבא. This directly connects to what we just saw in Rambam at the beginning of Perek Hamishi, in Hilchot Torah, that we just read. אמר לו רבי עקיבא, רבי חביבים ייסורים? And then Rabbi Akiva asked him a question about suffering and the value of it in this world, and how it can cause even the most stone-hearted to do teshuvah, which is perhaps something that we should all read before Yom Kippurim, perhaps, but not directly connected to what we're studying now. So let us return to Hilchot Torah. So we see how these Chachamim, Talmidim of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, how they related to him, how they viewed him, and therefore, if a person understands the value of true Chachmei Torah, then the various things that we are seeing here about that we have learned previously and today about Kavod Rabo and Yirami Rabo, all these things will not seem extreme to a person who lacks such understanding, as it says in the Talmud Bavli, the end of Masechet Makoth. How stupid are those? How stupid are those? How foolish and lacking in understanding are those who stand when Sefer Torah is brought into the room, but when the Hacham enters the room, they don't stand. It's purely a function of a lack of understanding, of wisdom, of appreciation. So let us continue. Halacha Yodbeth or Heth. En holikim kavod latalmid bifnei harav. One does not show any sign of respect towards the talmid in the presence of that talmid's rav, because in some way it is diminishing the kavod of the rav. Ela im ken haya derech rabo lahlok lo kavod, unless it is known that it is the want, the practice of that rav, because he holds this talmid in such great respect, and because he knows that he is a chacham in his own right, and he therefore shows him respect, and then it is mutar for others to do the same, even in the presence of the rav. An example of this is what I once heard with regards to Agaon, Rav Shalom Yosef Eliashiv Zatzal. When the Gaon, Rav Yoshua Neuwirth Zatzal, the author of the Shemiras Shabbat Hilchot, whom, as by the way, I should mention perhaps, as a boy I knew him. So I knew him really very well, but my father and I often davened in the same shul. This is during the short period when I was 11 years old, when we lived in Beit Vegan in Yerushalayim. We often davened in the same shul, and we met each other on Shabbat in the street, coming from or going to shul. I remember when Rav Neuwirth lived in Rehov Ahida, and he was known then, of course, but I suppose much less than later. His Sefer Shemiras Shabbat Hilchot came out approximately, I think, about 6 years before that time. So, at any rate, when Rav Yoshua Neuwirth, who was a Talmid Muvhak of Hagon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, But particularly after Rav Auerbach passed away, he used to go and speak and ask questions and what have you of Rav Elyashiv. Rav Elyashiv, it is reported, when Rav Novid would enter the room, he would stand, even though it wasn't a question of, he didn't think that Rav Novid was greater than himself, and neither did Rav Novid, and no one thought so. But he stood because that's what you must do. That is the correct, and it's not a question even of what you must do. It is a question of what you must do, but it's for a person of understanding. There is no issue of, well, I'll do it because I have to do it. It's something that you do because it is, of course, that is what you do. It's obvious that this is what you do. So a great Chacham in Torah, as Rav Elyashiv considered Rav Novid to be, even though he was his Talmud in practice, or he became his Talmud over time, he stood when he entered the room. So if for example, if other people were present as well, they could also stand for Rav Novid in the presence of Rav Elyashiv, because Rav Elyashiv was Holek lo kavod, showed him kavod, that as one should. Rambam continues, V'chol malachot sha'eved oseh l'rabo, talmid oseh l'rabo. All the malachot that an eved, a slave, a servant, performs for his master, as was normal practice in those days. Talmid oseh l'rabo. A talmid may do, and in fact should do where necessary, where it's appropriate, should do for his Rav. He should be willing to do so, and he should even wish to do so. And here we're referring to all manner of assistance and service that servants would perform for their masters, including removing their shoes when they entered the house, shall we say, and washing their feet, which was a common practice, etc. So the Rambam continues and says, "V'im haya b'makom she'en makirim otho." If we're talking about a place where this Talmid is not generally known by people in the area, وَلَا هَيُّ لَا تَفِلِينَ, and he was not wearing tefillin. Here, of course, you have an indication of when tefillin should and should not be worn, or where it was normal and correct for tefillin to be worn. So we're not talking here about the Beth Knesset, as we shall see. وَلَا هَيُّ لَا تَفِلِينَ وَحَشْمِ شَمَا يَمْرُوا عَبَدْهُ. So if people see that he is performing certain tasks or service for the Rav, as an eved, as a slave, a servant would usually do, but he happens not to be a slave at all. He's a Talmidi, maybe he's a Chacham in his own right, and he's not wearing tefillin for whatever reason. Let's say it's at night, and he's concerned that people will see him doing what he is doing, offering this service or helping his Rav out in a certain way, who's maybe an older person who requires assistance, and people will consider him to be an eved Kana'ani, and therefore not Jewish, or rather not a regular Jew. And he should not put on his shoe. He should not remove his shoe or put the shoe on his Rav's foot, as an eved would normally do, lest people think that he is an eved, and then this could lead to all kinds of rumors and all manner of various problems which we wish to avoid. So, in that situation, the Talmid is permitted not to do those things for the Rav. On the other hand, as we said before, the Talmid, because he understands who this Rav is and how he should, what his attitude towards him should be, the Talmid wants to serve his Rav, and that is proper and normal. And therefore, the Rav also has a certain responsibility or role to play here, and that is not to prevent it, because it's not a bad thing. It's a positive thing, and it's a positive example to others. And he who prevents his talmid from serving him, he's preventing him on the first count. He's preventing him from doing hesed, which is a mitzvah, gemilut hasadim. And porek mimenu yirat shamayim, and he also may cause the talmid to have less yirat shamayim, because behaving towards a chacham b'Torah, particularly one's Rav, in that way, showing that kind of respect and awe, increases yirat shamayim. It's an expression of, it's a function of yirat shamayim. And that's why people stand up when they see a Sefer Torah, because in some fashion they recognize that this is what they must do. It's a function of Yirat Shamayim in some sense, but with regards to a Chacham, excuse me, but with regards to a Chacham, they lack this understanding and this Yirat Shamayim. This Yira Mifnei HaChacham. V'chol tamid shemezarzel b'davar mikol kevod rabo. A tamid, again, v'chol tamid shemezarzel b'davar mikol kevod rabo gorem lashechina shetistalek miYisrael. A tamid who makes light in any way of anything to do with kevod rabo, causes the Shekhinah he drives the Shekhinah out of Am Yisrael, as it were. In other words, this is a very, very serious situation, state of affairs, which must be avoided. A society which understands the value of Torah and therefore the value of Chachmei Torah is a completely different society from one where such understanding is lacking. Where this exists as it should, then the Shekhinah can reside within Am Yisrael. And where this does not exist, the Shekhinah, as it were, is being forced out. In other words, these matters, all these matters that we're discussing here, are not only a question of an individual's responsibility or obligation vis-a-vis this person, this Rav, or Chachamim in general, which is true. It is an obligation. These are halachot that pertain to every individual as individuals. But these things also have a very real impact on society as a whole. And therefore, this is therefore what Chazal say here. That's not referring to the individual. That's referring to the Hevra, to the society, to the nation. Okay, now what does one do? We continue. Halacha yotet or halacha yod gimel, I'm sorry, or teth. What does one do if one sees one Rav's erring, making a mistake, doing something incorrect? Ra'a eth rabbo over al divrei Torah. If a Talmid saw his Rav doing something which, as far as he knows, is asur, Omerlo, how does he rebuke him or question what he's doing? Omerlo, he should say, Limaftanu rabenu kach v'chach. Is it not so? Lo limaftanu rabenu kach v'chach. Is that not how this is not what you taught us? As this is what we see this. I'll show you an example of this in a moment. An example of this is what we see in the Mishneh, the second perek of Berachot. You should be able to see here the Mishneh. Hathan Patur Ikriyat Shema B'Layla Harishon. Hathan is patur from Kriyat Shema on the first night. Wa'ad Musa Shabbat, im lo asa ma'aseh. But this is not what the Talmidim saw. The Talmidim saw Rabban Gamliel do. Ma'aseh Rabban Gamliel shekara avalayla shenasa. They saw him saying Kriyat Shema on his wedding night. Amaru lo limathtan or shehatan patur min Kriyat Shema avalayla harishon. This is how they express themselves. Amar lehem eni shomeh lechem levatel mimeni malchut shamayim sha'ahat. In other words, yes, that's the halacha, but I am acting in an exceptional manner. And as we see, Rabban Gamliel frequently, or on certain occasions, behaved in such a way. For example, the next statement of the Mishnah is Rahas v'lala harishon shemeta ishto. And he taught them, of course, that a veil is asur berehisa. The veil may not bathe. Amru lo limaftanu she'avel asur mililhos. Amar lahem ani cheshar kol ha'adam astanes ani. And there's another example of it here, as we see with regards to his Eved Tavi dying. So these are examples of what Rambam describes here. Rambam now continues. V'chol zaman shemazkir shemu'a b'fano omer lo kach limaftanu rabenu. If during the course of discussing some Torah matter, the Talmud mentions a halacha, a shemu'ah, a halacha, an idea, a concept, or an explanation, which has to, in Torah Sheba'al Peh, shemu'ah, of course, refers to the Torah Sheba'al Peh, that which is heard. Something which he learned from the Rav, if he mentions it during the course of the discussion, he mentions it in the name of the Rav. He says, Omer lo kachli matanu rabenu. This is what our teacher taught us. Wa'al yomar davar shelo shama' mirabbo ad sheyazkir shem omero. If he mentions something which he did not hear from his Rav, then he has to mention it in the name of the person who did say it. So if a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva was sitting before Rabbi Akiva and he mentions something that he heard in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, so then he has to say, I heard this in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, so that people will know, people who are present, the other Talmidim will know this is not something that Rabbi Akiva said, and perhaps he doesn't agree. And perhaps he has a different shita. And when his Rav passes away, he rends all of his clothing. He rends all of his garments until his chest is revealed and visible. And he is never allowed to sew it back up. This halacha of kari'ah applies to one's Rav, but that which applies to normal, regular avelim during the Shiva or the Shaloshim, they do not apply to a Talmid for his Rav. But kari'ah does apply, and it applies in a very serious manner because he's not allowed in any way to repair that garment, which, if you think about it for a moment, for many people in those days was a very serious financial loss. It may be one of the few things he has to wear, even maybe the only thing he has to wear. So it's a very significant halacha in that sense. In other words, when one's Rav dies, this should be felt and expressed in the most stark terms. Now, this halakha has to be qualified. and explains. So Rambam says in the next statement here, when is this the case? This is true of one's Rav Muvhak. One may have a number of Rabbanim, but one of them probably is his Rav Muvhak, the person from whom, as Rambam says, he Shalamad Bimenu Rav Chochmato, the Chacham from whom he learned most of what he understands or what he knows, or his approach and methodology to the study of Torah came from this Rav. As we have said before, nowadays, because most things can be found in books, except perhaps for methodology and understanding and things of that nature. So it applies more to such things than to simply knowing, which is not simple, but simply knowing what it states in this pasuk, or what the Mishneh says over there, or what it says in the Talmud in some other place. So Chochmathot today usually can be measured more in terms of a Talmid who follows in his Rav's footsteps, in terms of his derech, in terms of his understanding, his shita, what people call his shita, or his what they call in the yeshiva world sometimes, his derech belimud, the way he studies Torah, what he understands about how all the various moving parts of the Torah, how they fit together, etc. So this refers to Rabba Muvhak, Shalamad Mimenu Rob Chochmatho. Aval Im Lo Lamad Mimenu Rob Chochmatho, but if we're talking about his Rav who passes away, but it was not his Rav Muvhak, Hareze Talmid Haver. In that case, he's considered a Talmid Haver. In other words, everything we were referring to till now referred to a Talmid and his Rav Muvhak. Otherwise, the person is known as a Talmid. He's also a Talmid. He's also a Haver. Haver doesn't mean a friend, a chap, a mate. It means a colleague. As all Talmidei Chachamim are referred to as Haverim. Haverim often also referred to people because they were Talmidei Chachamim. They were makpid about Dinei Tuma Utahara. And they're referred to as Haverim, colleagues, because this is what that social class, that type of person, that's how they behaved, that's what they did. And they were known as Haverim. In other words, as if they belonged to the same club, which in fact they did. As opposed to Amei Ha'ares, who were not necessarily makpid al dinei tuma v'tahara, and we're not discussing things which are asur, not at all. There is no hova to be makpid on tuma v'tahara most times of the year. But this was the practice amongst Chachamim. And all the various halachot that we said previously referred specifically to one's Rav Muvhak. So what we said before, for example, about in halacha Zayin, yes, here, Hayav la'amod mipanei rabo, mishir'enu merachok v'lo ino. So this, for example, refers to one's Rav Muvhak. But if that's not what we're referring to, then Rambam says, Aval omed milefano v'kore'a alo kashem shehu kore'a al kol hametim shehu mitaber alehem. So he's required to stand, but not from any distance, but only when he comes closer to him. And he is hayav to be kore'a al rabo, who is not his Rav Muvhak, as he would do if he were an avel for a family member, which also means that he can, for example, repair the garment afterwards. In the current age of social media, etc., the opposite is the case. everybody thinks they must say something, they must have an opinion, and they must make it known to everybody else that they have what to say. And the very last thing that goes through people's minds is, before they make their usually vacuous comment on whatever is being discussed, the very last thing that goes through their minds is, well, perhaps I really shouldn't say this. Maybe it doesn't have to be said. Maybe there's no value, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's no value to what I'm saying. Maybe I don't know what I'm saying. All of that has, however much of that reticence and reserve existed in people once upon a time, has been lost altogether. This is one of the great, one of the terrible prices that society is paying today by way of this atmosphere that exists today, which we should all avoid and frequently even shun. We should have frequently nothing or as little to do as possible with in such places, in such forums, in such discussions. Rambam continues. Halakha Tet Zayin Yod Aleph. Harav hamuvhak sherasa limchol al kevodo. If the Rav, who's the Rav Muvhak of these Talmidim, he wishes to instruct his students not to show them this respect according to these halachot that we've learned, not to behave in these various ways. He wishes to be mohel al kevodo, to waive his rights, as it were, not his rights, but the proper modalities of behavior that we've described. He wishes to say that's not necessary. Whether in all of these various details or aspects of these halachot, or one of them, whether he wishes to do this with regards to all of his talmidim or one of his talmidim, was added in a second something to this, which means he is permitted to do so. And even though the Rav expressed this wish, that they're not, shall we say, he told them not to stand when he enters the room, for example. Hayav hatalmid lehadaro. Nevertheless, the Talmid has to, in some way at least, express kavod and hidur towards the Rav. So the Rav said not to stand, so maybe he doesn't stand in the normal fashion, because standing really means standing up completely, coming to a full standing position, and not sitting down immediately. And perhaps in this case, people sort of, hop off their chair and immediately sit down again. Well, that's also a form of hidur. Maybe it's not what the halakha demands, but if the Rav said I don't want you to have to stand every time I enter the Bet Midrash or something, then or the room, they nevertheless have to do something. It cannot be that a Chacham Torah is simply, as it were, ignored. Now I want to show you another statement of Rambam here. In Hilchot Sanhedrin, Perek Kaf, we find something which relates to this discussion. Rambam says here, Halakha Zayin or Halakha Well. I should say that at the beginning of this Perek, we're talking about this Perek discusses what Rambam says here at the beginning. Kol HaMechalel Dayan Midayanei Yisrael, a person who curses a Dayan, a Shofet. Over belo ta'aseh shene'emar Elohim lo techalel. Here the word Elohim refers to Dayanim in a Beth Din. V'chen im kilel hanasi, if a person cursed the head of the Sanhedrin, Ahad Rosh Sanhedrin Gedola o HaMelech, over belo ta'aseh shene'emar v'nasi v'amecha lo tha'or. So that's the general context, and here Rambam adds in Halakha Zayin or Well, Afal pi sheyesh ladayan o lanasi limchol al kevodo, even though a dayan or the nasi, may be mohel al kivudo, eno yachol limhol al kilulatho. He may not ignore the fact that he was cursed. As we said before, because this is not a private matter, this has an impact on the entire society. וכן שאר העם, אף על פי שמחל על קללתו, מכים את המקלל, שכבר חטא ונתחייב, or נתחייב. In other words, such a person must be punished. It cannot, such a thing cannot go without the appropriate response, because it sends a message which reverberates throughout society. Rambam continues, Aval mi shenithayev nidui mipnei sheifkir b'vet din, he who was who because he was mezalzel, because he treated disrespectfully the Beth Din, which should be shown great respect, and he did the opposite. Hifkir b'Beth Din, werasu Beth Din limhol al kivudam, and the Dayanim did not want to make an issue out of it. They don't want to excommunicate him, to put him into nidui, which, if you think about it, is a very serious thing, where a person is completely excommunicated. No one can speak to him, no one can sit next to him, eat with him, etc. He cannot go to the Beth Knesset. No one can have anything to do with him. That's nidui, and that is the proper response in such a situation. And the Chachamim in this case would prefer to waive this excommunication, this nidui. V'lo niduhu harashut biyadam. They are allowed to do so. Who, on condition shelo yeh b'davar hefsed b'chvod haboreh, on condition that this will not lead to a lack of kavod towards Hashem and the Torah. Kiron, such as a situation where shayu ha'am meva'atim b'dinei Torah u'b'dayanim. If this is what we call a makath medina, in other words, this is the general atmosphere and state of affairs in the society at this time, and this is a symptom of this malaise which infects society, then it's not an exceptional case. This is indicative of a more widespread phenomenon. In that case, the Dayanim may not be mohel. Or ilu fakaru ha'am b'davar, seeing that this is now a widespread phenomenon, tzrichim lahazek v'la'anosh kafi ma sheyira'eh lahem. So they must be, this must be dealt with according to the din, and there's no room for mehila, because they're not being mohel, they're not waiving something which accrues to them, which is owed to them personally. We're talking about bolstering the position and the status of the Torah, and by extension of Hashem in Jewish society, and that is not something that can be waived. We shall stop here for today. Hayu baruchim.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.